Thanks for coming. And today we're very happy to have Kalai with us, who is now I can say he's an old friend. And I will, of course, formally introduce Kalai in a bit. And the idea for today, given that it's Bhim Jayanti, the idea was to come together as researchers who are kind of vaguely related to Brown, and be able to read Babasaheb's text, Annihilation of Caste, together. And hopefully, so Kalai, the plan is that Kalai will guide us through the reading. And hopefully at the end of it, we can have a discussion. So just to introduce Kalai, Kalaiyarasan A is an assistant professor at the Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai in India. He was previously a Fulbright Nehru Post-doctoral Fellow at the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, Brown University. He was also a research faculty at the National Institute of Labor Economics, Research and Development, a research wing of NITI Aayog, which is also informally the New Planning Commission of India. His academic interests lie in regional political economy, structural inequalities, and comparative political economy in the global south. His recent publications are the Dravidian Model, Interpreting Political Economy of Tamil Nadu, and Rethinking Social Justice. So Kalai, I'll let you take it away, and really looking forward to learning from you yet again.
Thank you, Aarushi. Thank you, Aarushi, for a generous introduction, and it's certainly a pleasure and privilege to be here, and particularly in this context, celebrating Babasaheb Ambedkar Jayanti, and it eternally inspires us in many ways. And I'm going to I'm going to introduce a text. It's a case I would think of this text as a kind of manifesto, one can think, as Annihilation of Caste. And among all other texts which deals with caste, I guess this is one which somehow over-determines in its theoretical emphasis of caste and its origin, and the way it operates and its solution in that. So I'm going to do it's a collective reading, but I'm just going to give a brief and outline of context of this text, and the central thesis of the text, and what the sources of power that the text makes the sources of power in India, and how caste manifests, and solutions to addressing the problem of caste in India, and my own reflections on the text. Getting on the text actually was written in 1936, and before that, December 1935, Babasaheb Ambedkar was invited to the Punjab in Lahore to deliver a lecture. This is a context. This is an association called Jatpat Total Mandal, an organization devoted to the abolition of caste. By the way, this organization is not a Dalit organization, but it's called as a Hindu reforming organization. And he prepared a speech, and he shared the speech, and the organizers felt that the speech is radical, and therefore they cancelled. In fact, it was his presidential address, and his invitation was cancelled, and he published that speech under the title "The Annihilation of Caste." It was originally the speech prepared for this presidential address for this organization. And it was in a way, the text was in a bold declaration of war on caste, I would say. And importantly, he mentioned in it that that was the last time he is addressing the Hindus. In fact, in the sense, almost he's giving up, because remember, he was actually, before this, there was another text, and perhaps that was the initial entry of his theoretical engagement with the caste question. It was in 1916, which is 20 years before this text. That text is called Genesis of Caste in India. And of course, the theoretical formulation of that text is slightly would call as a precursor to this. In fact, this is more advanced and more sophisticated understanding of caste compared to the original text. But you can see here, even he mentions in his in this text, in the third edition of this text, that he wanted to incorporate the other text, which was written in 20 years before. But nonetheless, this text actually summarizes what they have to say on the caste and its origin and its mechanism. So let's directly, if you look at at broad, this is, of course, there are many things that I've missed out here, perhaps, and because it's a rich text and 76 pages, and I'm trying to give main 4 points that that I find as a central to the text, which I think is first. According to him, caste is a kind of graded system of sovereignties. In the sense, as we understand the sovereignties of power, each caste and acquired its own sovereignty and positioned in an hierarchical order. Think of this in a vertical building with the multiple storage without any steps. One can't move up and other, and the socially accepted kind of ascending scale of hatred and descending scale of contempt. And this is actually I mean, one can think of a graded way of inequality of the caste. And he also says that in another context within this text, in a response to left at that point in time, who actually was thinking this as a not only left, there is a nationalist also was trying to theorize caste as a division of labor, and is not a serious problem because division of labor existed across civilizations and across societies. And then he said, no, it is not division of labor. It is a division of laborers. In the sense, group here, the plurality here refers to a group. And again, as I mentioned earlier, in a graded system, it is in a kind of situated in an hierarchy in which one graded over the other. So this is in a direct response to many who actually were theorizing and then in 30s that it is a division of labor, because even many Marxists believe this is a division of labor. And he was directly responding to them. It is not a division of labor, it is laborers and a group. It in a way think of as a fusing caste and class in this sense here. And again, hierarchically located and mutually exclusive, and one can't move above other. And this again think of as a it's not driven by any kind of natural aptitude, as one would think of in the context of division of labor over a period of time. One acquires skills or falls in a certain category and reproduces over a point in time, and as a spontaneous act. But according to me, it is not a spontaneous act. This division of labor, the source of this division, it is a kind of dogma of predestination sanctioned by divine basis. Here, clearly the divinity comes from the Hindu Vedic order. And he contrasts this with the Genesis, which you think of Old Testament and Christianity and even other Abrahamic religions, including Islam or other religions, where the individual happen to be the as a source of equality of power or whatever that means. The individual is the source of the beginning in that sense. Here, the Hindu cosmology, on the other hand, actually assigns man at the group instead of at the man at the origin of society. Here, the genesis or the evolvement of society doesn't begin with an individual, it is with a group. So in that sense, caste is a derivative right. In the sense, it is you get a respect, individual get a respect, not based on his aptitude or his act or his content of his character. It is based on the caste it belongs to, or the caste is by birth, it happened to be, which, I mean, as would many scholars call, as we know recently of another student in Hyderabad University mentioned in his that in a letter that it is a fatal accident. So that fatal accident falling in a particular group divides your rights. So in that sense, the caste is a derivative right, not as a natural right based on the spontaneous act of character, or even the human being as a person. So you get your rights based on your location in the social order. This is a broad. So in that sense, I would take in this actually 3 things directly. One is it is a group which matters. Second, it is graded inequality. Third, it is a division of labor, not labor, and as a divine basis based on the dogma of predestination. And how the sources of power in a real-time operation in a society it operates, how it manifests comes in a little more detail, but even think of as a sources of power. I mean, how the power is operates in this an elaborate social order. And he thinks if you divide the power into 3 domains, which you normally social scientists do, which you call as a social domain, and political and economic. For him is the social domain, which actually over-determines the other two, and which is the sources of production of power based on caste and gender, and as I mentioned, the laborers. Here, the caste and gender operates very, very, very intimately. We can discuss in detail because in fact, the reproduction of caste lies on gender, which is another discussion we can have in detail. But the social actually is a important key word here compared to the other. And how this actually reproduce, one can think of, why someone created it 2000 years before us, I mean, we don't know exact year, even years before. Why should it continue over a period of time? And for that he has an answer, which is kind of elaborate mechanism of what you call penalty and or rules. That rule some way is either textual interpretation or in fact culturally permeated in many ways in real life, and that actually ensures that inequality gets reproduced. And if those who violate or those transgress that caste rule get penalized, and the penalization begins operates in multiple contexts, multiple ways, and different ways. And in this text, Ambedkar clearly makes a case with the Ramayana story with the Shambhuga, which actually, in fact, he wanted to do. I think let's put it. I mean, this elaborate mechanism. Let's put it read, assuming it is not supposed to his job. If he was doing, I don't know the exact word of the Davam in the sense preaching, the seeking God directly. And he was actually killed by Ram, and Ambedkar finds that it is nothing wrong in it. What Ram did, the Lord Ram did, killing the Shambhuga, who happened to be Sudra, because according to Ambedkar, what Ram did is right, is because he's violated the rules of game here, which is supposed to follow certain rules dictated by his birth. Shambhuga, in this case, violated. So therefore, this kind of elaborate rule, this is written in the text, that need not operate in the same way in every society, because India is also very diverse in that sense. But definitely there is kind of cultural imbibing of this value system, and that gets reinforced. And we even see today that in a different context, when intercaste marriage happens, how the caste rules are reinforced. Somewhere this inequality is enforced through penalty. That's a key word here in understanding what he means by that penalty, what he means by the caste rules. And therefore, he clearly says that even for the political reform, why this political reform here matters, at this context, remember this text was written in 1936, it was thick and thin, the time of freedom movement, and the nationalists were actually marching on political reform, and political solution is the first for India, Swaraj rule, and the social question, caste, all that can go relegated to the later stage. And he thought that no, it doesn't happen. If anything, in any society, if you look at historically, you need to have a social revolution, social change that must precede of any political change. Even if you attain a freedom from foreign power, it does not going to guarantee the freedom that one would think of. And therefore, he actually, this is an engagement. When the text you see as a political reform, it is direct reference to the nationalist. And he says that you can't achieve the political reform. So much so here, you need to even, it makes it clear, even the social reform, even the nationalists had a social reform in the Congress, which is the Congress had a social conference as a one sub wing, as another wing within the Congress party, with the Banerjee as a first person. 1891, if I'm right, was formed, and later that was actually abandoned. Even that social conference, which is attached to the Congress, was not really a social reform in a societal kind or addressing caste or something. It was actually, in fact, had a very minor goal, which is basically addressing the family of the you call as everybody, particularly elites, in terms of the widow remarriage, child marriage, etc. Even that was not acceptable to nationalists, and later it was relegated. And therefore, he said, how are you going to achieve even a small, very reduced form of social reform was not acceptable to the nationalists? How are they going to address the question of caste if it is relegated to? I think that was his mind, and definitely, therefore, he felt that any reform, if you think of political reforms, must be preceded by a social reform. And therefore, he calls it, this is his exact word, freeing mind and soul is a precondition for political revolution. And he gives examples after examples in European history to Indian history to say that how every political revolution was preceded by a social revolution before and religious revolution before. And therefore, here India cannot be an exception to it. And I think it was very consistent in this. Even if you remember this question, even in the Constitutional Assembly, this text was written in 1936, and the previous text was written in 1916, and Constitutional Assembly in 1950. And there also he makes a similar claim that India is going to achieve, India is going to get into a contradiction. We are going to have a political equality. It is after freedom, after giving constitution to ourselves, and says, but we're going to have a contradiction in the society because the society is deeply undemocratic. And therefore, he said any change that has to happen in India has to proceed with the social. So he was very clear, unambiguous in that. And he was also similarly having a solo with the left, the Marxists, who also believed, as I mentioned earlier, the economic is the exploitation is the problem, rest will resolve it. And he was completely disagreeing. It doesn't work that way. Economy is not static, it changes rapidly. But the social changes in Indian context takes a longer time, has not happened in the history, what we see with respect to caste. And therefore, he was suspicious of the economic reform. Power will take care of the question. But remember, he's not completely abandoning political or economic. He said only it all matters. But Indian context, specifically social, actually gave the importance to compare to the other two. But he actually recognized the importance of all three. And that was actually very clear on it. But in this, definitely in this scheme of things, they actually give a primacy over social over the other two domains. That actually clear the sources of power for him. And if you think of manifestation, why he was actually, was sometime in the sum of this word, I would think of as an anger in the word towards particularly the Marxists and the nationalists for not understanding, for the simple fact, this is the line one can understand is anger with them, particularly turn in any direction you like. Caste is a monster that crosses your path. You cannot have a political reform or you cannot have an economic reform unless you kill this monster called caste. And it is very clear because it's so apparent. And before 36, it was in Magadh Satyagraha, before the Manuscript burning, the range of protests was happening in the western part. And you also had a long history in the southern part of the country of the having anti-caste mobilization. How come one can't forget that acknowledge the importance of the social domain as compared to other economic and political? And he clearly says you can't have anything. And he goes that if you think of Hindu society, because the many actually started as now even then that of Hindu society is equivalent to India in many ways. And this Hindu society, when was Hindu as a society? It is just a collection of caste. It is not even a public. And he gets open and unambiguously says why it is called as a collection of caste, because there was no intermingling or a shared feeling of one with the other. It is a collection of caste, kind of rat hole, divided one from other, and it has no connection. And in fact, he shows is exactly his line of caste has never been federated coming for any common cause except one instant, which is in the Muslim rat. And I think it was actually even today we can think of actually no caste coming together for anything public good. If you look at the public political science literature, why in a caste divided society no demand or no collective action for public goods? It's basically caste is one of the divide. And here, if you see the violence, and definitely the sum of the caste comes together. I think it was actually opt even in the now, it was in then. And he also goes and says that, there was a context in which he says, someone was criticizing Islam as a cruel religion in the past. And he says, your Hindu religion is meanness is worse than cruelty. That's what he says. And it is indifferent. Indifferent is actually, this is a word I think he emphasizes very much, which actually we see clearly now, right? In the sense of, many think that liberalism are being attributed to this indifferent in the sense you maintain the distance from other. Actually, it is not indifferent here in Hindu. Here it means a complete contempt for other. That's what I think it means here. He says is what kind of this is without any emotional connection with the fellow human being that can infect a people. That's actually, he says, is a kind of worst. This is being indifferent to other. I think is this word needs to be emphasized of the indifference as a basis. And of course, the collection of cost, no shared values here. And this also you can see in many other texts in his political reading of which influenced largely by John Dewey, where he makes his associated living or democracy or other, even his influence and his influence of sources of influence, Buddhism or French Revolution, all one connection you would find is the bringing people together. As something, I think the caste for him is the dividing people. It's not, like a building so many barriers. I think it's breaking that is, I guess, is important thing. And somehow this our Indian societal structure, particularly with the cultural and social, religious sanction to it, divided and never allowed people come together. I think that is clearly gets one can notice in his text. And that's how he says it's a manifestation. How come those who see the political reform will resolve the problem, India's problem, or the economic question will resolve the problem, not understand this monster that you see everywhere around you? And the solution that he offers for this is clearly the religious social basis, the religious basis of this social order. And that actually needs to be definitely demolished. And that I guess clear the first condition. Then second, he actually definitely put forth very strong claim that the intermarriage is an important act. And remember, the reproduction of caste always plays with the caste gender connection. The woman actually bears that burden of taking this. And here is intermarriage would, according to him, resolve, partly at least generate, because the fusion of blood would actually generate sympathy or shared meaning, shared attachment to each other. In that sense, earlier he was thought interdying was an issue, because that was an issue that Gandhi and others were having debate with. In fact, Gandhi was having debate with others too, but definitely in intercaste and intermarriage was the important aspect of it. But Ambedkar believes strongly, more than interdying, intermarriage is the key in that sense of solvent of caste in that sense. And with the larger political question, he definitely believed a kind of an attitude of respect and reverence towards fellow men, which again, as I mentioned, is largely come from influence by Buddhism one level and the French Revolution, and also largely John Dewey, definitely in his approach, particularly democracy and the ethical of ideal humanity, all that. You can see this not just in this text, but across his political treatise. And my reflections on it is I see even relevant, current today, how we can think of reading this text. If you think of, again, sources of power today context, state, market, and the society, I guess still society is an important component, and caste actually permeates in every aspect of it. And that continues to be sources of will. And I think it's not surprising, even there's another tangential reading to this text. If you read the reflections on the Constitution by experts like Granville, Austin, and others, they call our Constitution as a social document. Why I think it's a social document, even including the recent one, Mother Ghosla's book, is as a pedagogical instrument, because Ambedkar strongly believed that our society is deeply undemocratic. As I mentioned, extensively now we've seen that. And some way Constitution is seen as a pedagogic instrument to discipline. And the law or the above, which all I think mattered, very, 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 very codified, very, very granular way, the rules and duties, rights and duties were mentioned in the Constitution. I guess perhaps is to discipline this deeply undemocratic society. That is actually with the, I think why Constitution gets that. Now we have a lot of evidence to make this claim. And I think it's why this happened, why this Constitution happened to be this long and this lengthy and this detail is perhaps this deep suspicion of the society that Ambedkar had. And my own take another here, I think we think of this ascending order of content and this descending order of hatred and descending or scale of contempt. I see here again, there's something which I was talking to someone with this text. I think what we see here is the Marxist reading or the economist reading of not just Indian caste system is seen only the material as extraction, resource exploitation. I think one can think of political theories can think of as a surplus recognition in the sense, how the certain castes are maybe in hierarchy, the recognition at the top will get more than what they deserve. At the bottom, it gradually declines. I think there are in individual or the caste groups in the society, because of caste identity, gets a surplus recognition more than what that individual is if you want to think of ideal nature of the, based on its content of character, I think it's more than that. It's based on the, I think, this caste identity. As one can think of surplus extraction or surplus production, you can also think of surplus recognition for certain individuals, certain caste groups. I think that I see from this graded inequality, in not just in terms of resource allocation, also in a broader sense of respect. And as I mentioned, then again, it is, and we can suddenly link of allocation of resources with this question of surplus recognition. And more importantly, for the collective good I mentioned earlier, as a political scientist also is concerned about, even the economics are concerned, why in India there's no collectively people coming together for any common good. I think caste continues to be an important barrier of bringing peoples together. And of course, caste comes together when it wants to do a violence that generate in a common enemy. And here is the, politically charged up by of a certain political mobilization can become, it can actually federate caste. But otherwise, for the common public good, it does not. And social norm, which I think is very important for me in my own research in terms of how the social norm influences very excluding caste networks. And that networks generates a kind of mutual distress, and in fact, very selective network, and does not allow any kind of, because since even within the economic literature, the trust requires for any economic transaction, right? That way here, the social connection or the social network based on the caste decides over economic transactions. And if you want to go further in economic reading of certain school of economic reading, which believes in incentive, definitely this kind of social norm stifles that incentives, and which is, if you think of in that economic literature, is suboptimal in the sense it's, without caste, I think things would go much better. This is my reflection based on this text. Maybe I stop here, and maybe others can respond to this, and we can have a more discussion. Aarushi?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Kalai. Kalai, if you want to maybe unshare your screen, then you could have a. Okay. Okay. So I guess I can maybe get the discussion started by asking a question, and then the floor is, of course, open for everyone to engage with this reading of the Annihilation of Caste. So in the last slide, Kalai, where you're looking at sort of Annihilation of Caste from an economics perspective, there, like, we understand how the market sort of use division of labor. But perhaps what we don't understand entirely is, so like labor, it's clear how labor demand, like, is a caste is exploited to generate labor demand. But could you say a little bit more about labor supply decisions, and to the extent these are decisions, and also the role of social norms in making those decisions?
Yeah, I think reading this, because here since birth acquires importance and the rights are given based on the individual, in the group than the individual, I think there's a different reading one can do with this, particularly with the labor. I think there are certain people here constitute born laborers. I think perhaps is because by birth you are laborers, right? You are not supposed to have other duties because your occupation also very tied with your birth position. Of course, things are changing now, but not to the extent that one would think of. But definitely there is a connection to it. Being a laborer, and who could be laborer, who could be a capitalist, who could be a landlord, who could do what. Actually, it's a clearly well defined roles. So definitely that actually plays out in terms of inherited forms of association or inherited occupation link with the individual. particularly with the labor supply and demand with this market, I'm not getting that question now, that market and supply and demand part. But with the caste part, I would think of as a defined at the birth, and it continues. And the social norm, as I mentioned clearly, social norm operates at multiple levels. I think it's under-theorized, my reading within economic literature of in India. Why? Because the legal, which is what you call law, actually does not operate many way in dictates the economic transaction. In India, even in the formal economy, the informal connections or the informal routes of decision actually plays a much bigger role. In that case, the trust, that other thing required to have that transaction takes place even in the formal economy. I'm not talking about the informal economy. This social norm dictated by caste would definitely shapes that outcome. And I think that maybe this is one domain in the business transaction. Even the laboring, we all know the literatures, it suggests that how the clustering of the laborer takes place, and that may have even the impact on even the wages and other stuff of the based on clustering based on the caste. I know if the migration pattern, if you look at the rural versus urban, if the contemporary or even the historical, you clearly see the caste pattern to it. Even the laboring, how the labors are clustered, and how that based on the social norm, again caste and lineage, that which will document it. I think that's a two thing in terms of a social norm operating in the labor, social norm operating in the business transactions. We can actually extend that more. I mean, I'm just thinking through, but I think it's under researched area, I guess, my reading of how the way in which the caste social norm operates in the economic outcome. I mean, we can discuss in detail more.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, how do you place this in sort of the economics literature of labor market discrimination? Like,
okay, yeah.
Sort of more dispersion in wages by caste, but my understanding is that so basically wages cannot move because of legal restrictions, etc. But occupations are also not moving at the same time. So kind of broadly, how do we?
Yeah, I get it clearly. Yeah, that operates, and we all know this other, even the labor market, the literature on the labor market discrimination based on the wage discrimination, how much because of your identity, the price of being a particular caste actually, of the wage difference for the identical job, or even the occupational segregation, low paid or up, different allocation of jobs for a similar qualification perhaps. The both way it operates. Yeah, get it that in that sense. Yeah, that way also this can influence, caste norm can influence clearly.
Yeah. I'll just open it up to questions from the
I think the economists
or comments.
Oh, hi. I just had a follow-up. Thank you, Aarushi, thank you, first of all, for the presentation. And thank you, Aarushi, for these questions. And I had a follow-up to your previous response when you said there's a well-documented clustering of labor based on caste. And I just, could you describe a little more exactly what you mean by clustering there?
The one, if I'm right, I think it's this is a famous. Aarushi, can you tell me who's the IIM guy who did this migration from Bombay from different part of country? Who did a book? Tumbe, yeah. He has documented historical pattern of migration from different parts of country. I think it's the Bombay and different parts. Actually, clearly you see the caste pattern to it. And this is an historical migration, like 100 years before, longer archival material in mobilized, and so clearly there's a caste who actually in terms of occupation and in business and range of ways that that happens. So that is even the contemporary, I guess, if I'm right, Kaivan Munshi is some way its migration is I think mapped with the caste connection. Is it right, Aarushi, if I'm correct?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, you don't agree with this work?
No,
okay.
No, I am saying I agree. Yeah. Kaivan documented migration networks, and Andy Foster, who's Mike and I's advisor, has documented insurance networks.
Caste as insurance,
Yeah, but also I think, like just following up on the discrimination part, like Sukhdev Thorat has work.
Yeah, that's a well
documented
documented. Yeah, the labor
wages,
market
wage
discrimination.
differentials. As, um,
I can emphasize here one theoretical, there's something, if there's any sociologist or anthro want to develop this idea, I think caste is an insurance, we say, caste is insurance without paying premium. If you think of the modern idea of insurance, normally insurance, you'll have to pay premium for your risk, right? In a caste society, since happen to be a member of that caste, and you have to be, of course, at some point, you have to be actively reciprocate each other within the caste cluster, but it can actually produce a kind of, without paying a premium, just because you fall under that caste group, you get a support that when you are in extreme situation. I think this is also documented, not exactly on the caste as an insurance, but one can think of, when you fall, who actually you call immediately, where you get to your immediate support come from. But again, the one thing with this problem with all of this literature as a caste as a network, caste as an insurance, they assume that the caste are actually positioned in horizontal level. Each caste groups as a maybe equivalent level of network or the thickness of the network or the pool of the resources. But no, it is not the case. It is hierarchically located, and that those who come down would actually get a lesser and lesser and thin, and those who go above, you get a more resources. Thickness of network is much stronger. So therefore, we need to be careful as to when we think of the caste as a network, as if it is equally distributed randomly, or maybe equal terms in the size into, maybe if you think of the thickness across caste groups. No, it's not true that way, because this is also a literature, in some literature on the other side of the spectrum, who try to valorize as a, caste is a good thing claim. There's also literature emerging. Someone in IIM has been saying this for last 30 years, which is to, some way as a endorse this. So we need to think of this as a critically engage with this legislation. That I think I need to say. Yeah.
yeah, on that, like there's also two competing papers in economics right now. One that is showing that division of labor by caste has actually fostered economic growth in India. And another
Yeah, the World Bank paper, right?
Yeah.
World Bank paper, right? Yeah.
No, it's a bunch of, I think some of them
Right,
work
yeah.
at the bank. And there is another paper by Sampreet Singh Goraya, who's argued, who's done some structural estimation to show that had caste divisions not existed, there wouldn't have been so much occupational segregation, and so shows how caste actually was detrimental to India's economic growth. So yeah, those two papers are out there. I don't know which one. So okay. So other questions?
I think economic, we've been too much economics, I guess. Maybe Manu, there are others, historians are there, political scientists are
there. Hi, thank you, Kalai and Aarushi, for organizing this. I have a quick comment and also question on Kalai's presentation. So Kalai, really thinking about, the last slide where you spoke about caste being discriminatory and, its relationship with public goods provision, and I suspect that you already know what line of question I have. So I'm really thinking of if you can reflect on the tension between bringing the question of representation and then relating it to public goods provision. So caste and how it provides public goods, but then the mechanism which is representation, and really the tension that that I wanted to bring up and thought you might want to comment on that was, so as much as representation requires that I make claims on the state or on power, make claims to power on the basis of some identity, right? So that allows groups to make those claims, right? So one school of thought would think that it is this kind of representation that allows these groups to get public goods, right? So I make claims in the democratic realm or in the representation realm as the identity that I have, and based off which I get the goods that I can, right? And that is a powerful argument. The other side of the argument, however, is that that inhibits the creation of this identity, right? Like this common identity, which would allow everyone to get the goods that they would want. And I'm wondering, even if you look at contemporary India, you find, for instance, a tension between these two ideas. And I'm just wondering, what do you have to say on the idea of representation? Who represents the idea of representation as a relationship with, what you wrote as caste and public goods provision. Thank you again, both, for this.
Thank you, Banu. It's a long and rich question, and you also know the part of the literature out there in political science. I think I would think of this in a way, the way in which so this recent book, Mobilizing Marginalized by Amit Aguja, theorized in the sense of, I think if I read that book or answer your question reading through that book, I think I would think of this maybe the representation is necessary, may not be a sufficient condition to ensure a public goods. Maybe the representation would ensure perhaps implementation level of problems of, in terms already the existing goods. But the content of goods that needs to be provided, I think that requires more than representation. I guess is the broader social reform, because representation, again, if you think of this, only can be reduced to simple and identity level alone, which again, cannot bring a collective possibility of federating caste groups together, or similarly positioned or even slightly positioned over and up, maybe clustered around caste groups. Even that is difficult to bring if you only think of the representation. And if you think of the broader social mobilization, maybe again you may ask the question at what condition this broader social mobilization can take place, which can federate caste together and claim for a public goods. I think it's a historically given, and partly also political labor involved in it. If I have to think of the way, say, Amit Aguja actually said this, a Maharashtrian case with the Tamil Nadu and compared to Bihar and UP, where it actually more in terms of the caste mobilization or the caste representation in the political power did not have a, say, as a broad basing or bringing caste together. It is in a way mobility of that particular caste. Maybe that would have definitely got certain goods, certain things done for the particular caste groups, which actually achieve that mobility, which is again important representation even from the caste from the below. Whereas if you think of a broader social mobilization with the degree of representation there, that perhaps that would achieve a better or a more tangible, what do you call it? Not tangible, richer goods of, better collector of goods, actually, in that sense of, they think of as a health and education and other basic services, I would think in that way. I can give it two examples. One is Amit Aguja, and there's another book another work by Narayan Lakshman. It's called Pattern of Poor, and he actually is trying to understand the social composition or the social base of the political parties in Karnataka and the social base of political parties or the political regimes in the Tamil Nadu. And he was saying wherever you had a multi-class coalition, you had a relatively pro-poor intervention in provision of public goods, even the budgetary allocations, whereas the Karnataka, according to him, was divided based on the two dominant caste cluster, which actually siphoned off the resources based on that caste-based occupation, particularly irrigation and other stuff, but less scope of resources was available for broader public goods or even the pro-poor things. I think these are very contingent out. Of course, there are a lot of pushback also to this literature, but I can think of this. I think I would still think caste is a divide. I think we can think of as a fragmented polity. Doesn't allow coming together of for asking collective bargaining or collectively seeking for, goods. Yeah.
I think
And then,
question.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. It's been a while since I read Annihilation of Caste, so it was a good refresher. And I kind of wanted to ask, I was interested in how Annihilation of Caste also provides a framework for Dr. Ambedkar's kind of future career in terms of how he tackles caste. I think, as you mentioned, there are kind of two ways in which he tries to approach the annihilation of caste in his subsequent career. The first is this, like, through the state as a kind of, as you said, a pedagogical instrument. And then the second is through like social reform in society or conversion. And as we know, at the end of his life, he leads a movement for Dalits to convert to Buddhism. And he mentions both of these approaches towards the end of Annihilation of Caste, when he's trying to answer the question of how should caste be abolished. But I think what's interesting about Annihilation of Caste, and as you said, how it's his last, as you said, speech to the Hindus or as a Hindu, in quotes, is that he also, and I feel like this hasn't really been discussed much, is that he kind of calls for this, for the Brahmins to be kind of regulated by the state, and kind of almost like a civil service to be created in which the state will actually regulate like Brahmanism and democratize, basically throw open the control of like who is able to read like and interpret Hindu scriptures to Hindu society. And he's saying that for Hindus, this may be a good way to abolish caste. And then the other alternative is conversion to a religion which professes liberty, equality, and fraternity. And I thought it was interesting because he eventually obviously goes on to institute Dalits or scheduled castes through the state in the Constituent Assembly. And I think I wanted to ask what, like, if the state's object is scheduled castes as opposed to Brahmins, how that might, like, in terms of who the state is paying attention to, how that affects, because I think in a way, in many parts of India, there is a kind of contempt for scheduled castes because of the reservations they have, and how people see them as actually like upper castes see themselves as casteless, and then scheduled castes are kind of keep reintroducing the question of caste. How that question might have been different if like Brahmins were the attention of the focus of the state. And then for conversion, how eventually he, like, in Buddha and his Dhamma, the Buddha is kind of, he says that Buddhism was proclaiming liberty and equality and fraternity much before the French Revolution. So how does he envision like this new kind of movement of Buddhists to kind of negotiate the tradition of Buddhism with like these modern kind of ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity?
I thank you, Thank you, Kahaz. There's actually, yeah, it's a very detailed question. Let me try to answer. I mean, I'm not really, I think I'm not sure I'm fully equipped to respond to your questions, but let me try answering one by one. I think there are three, four points interconnected to the question, I guess. So let's begin with the social thing. It is very unambiguous. Even I'm fully convinced that if you think of the sources of power, he was deeply suspicious of the social. I thought that needs to be completely re-altered. That actually is the sources of the evil. Even if you think of why he was not even forthcoming for the third tier of the power, which actually came in only in the early 90s of the village panchayat, etc. Because he thought the village panchayat is the caste panchayat clearly, and it's a den of uses this word. I'm not getting that quote. It's a very famous quote that it's ignorance and kind of sources of all kind of evil. Clear very much. That's very unambiguous on that. And that sense is clearly believed that the strong centralized state, even that way, I would think of he has shared a certain understanding with Nehru too in that sense, because he also believed for a different reason, because Nehru strongly believed having a centralized state would resolve the problem of economic question, because for Nehru it's economic question, class or poverty, that was the main concern for in his worldview of resolving the India's problem. So I think both shared in that sense of the strong centralized state, which would actually discipline. For Ambedkar, it is a social of the cleaning up its casteism, whereas for Nehru it is of the economic planning and which requires a strong power. That is very I guess is. With respect to constitution, this again I am very convinced with. I mean, it's well documented from Granville, Astin to even recent Madhav. There are many multiple authors have written on this, why our constitution is very elaborate, because it needs to be codified, because to resolve the problem of the social, because at any point in time, because why social here, social also can dictate the state back, and whoever comes to the power in the politics would be coming from shaped from the social domain, right? That sense, they should not alter or should not change the situation, and therefore there was elaborate codes were brought into the constitution to ensure, put a check on this, the mess that emerges, casteism that emerges from particularly from the social, the unfreedom that emerges from the social domain. I think it's very clear with respect to state and the constitution, and the market, as it discussed earlier. That's a different point. With respect to conversion, I think it's a very again rich, very contested, very longer history thing. Your different point in time, you had a different accounts of it, accounts of different contemplation of conversion strategy. I think it's still in the sense, it was actually one point in time was attached to the Islam as a solution to the. And many feared that what would happen, because remember the Indian state or Indian society then under British India was considered to be the what you call as a enumerate state, right? In the sense that the numbers matter, population matters, population size matters, because each community were given based on their numbers, and Hindus strongly believed in that sense. I think one of the reasons even Gandhi went that Pune Pact, with that level of greatest to if Ambedkar succeeds in that Pune Pact thing, that is a beginning of separation of the untouchables from Dalits from the or other communities. I think the Dalits, in that case, Dalits, there are other denotified communities, there are other communities who are also part of it. I think the Hindu, in the size of the population will come down. I think that's one of the thing, and there were pressure on him also not to convert what they called non-Bharatiya religion. There was even he was contemplating with even going with the Sikhism, and the Sikhism also again the longest I've read somewhere. The Sikhs themselves were also concerned if more Dalit joined as a Sikh, the non Dalit Sikh population size would come down, and the religious power of Sikh itself will change, configuration will change. That dimension also was there. And also there was if I'm right, in 1950 or 49, there was a couple of letters I've read. I think it's produced in some of the articles where the Dalits of that is the Punjab presidency then of the Punjab region, which includes Haryana, Punjab, the current Haryana Punjab, were writing to, I will say that Sikhism is not a solution. In fact, we were dealt very badly by the caste Hindus, particularly I think it's there is Jats and others, and therefore they may not give us. So even I was actually while he was actually sympathetic to, because in this article, if you remember in the Annihilation of Caste, it mentions Islam and Sikhism. It says it provides kind of fellowship, right? Kind of brotherhood among its own members. But Hinduism does not do it in that sense. So given this practicality, there was this, all of this were actually explored, like Islam and Sikhism. And finally, reaching to Buddhism is definitely of course, the historical legacy of the Buddhism and his thinking. I think it's Buddhism also the way, remember, I think it's, if I remember the rules, the number of aspects mentioned that we need to follow, rules that we need to follow, the duties that one has to follow, converting the Buddhism is a different kind of Buddhism that historically we inherit. I think it's some way made compatible with the modernity. I think it was in a way preparing the people to embrace a religion which actually was in sync with the requirement of the modernity. In that sense, infusing the values of as you mentioned, of the French ideas of the liberty, equality, and with thinking of the Buddhist history in historical sense, and of even I would say the pragmatism of John Dewey. I think all of this actually have a sharp shape. All of this have shaped that 56 document. If you think of, I don't know the numbers of the commandment in that is mentioned, but many of them were actually removed from the original Buddhist text. Was not there exactly. There were actually, I think it's a Christoph book, I guess, if I'm right, he has mentioned each of those aspects, where that sources of that aspect that Ambedkar actually derived from. So clearly we see, I mean, for him, I think that's what I think, as you mentioned, initially he dealt with, he thought that the political representation is the minimum that we could achieve with the ensuring degree of representation in the political legislature and, across spectrum. Then you have a reservation until one level of the state. And society thought the solution is the Buddhism through. And one thing he was actually clearly was not happy and satisfied with the economic question. It definitely, because the land reform or many things that he believed would have, it's not happened. Did not really, because the land reform that actually followed India's post-independence did not give ownership to the Dalits. It in fact gave ownership to the intermediate caste, those who are actually tillers, right? The land to the tillers. Tillers were not Dalits, particularly in Punjab. In that, if you think of the Punjab, there's something called Punjab Land Alienation Act of 1909, if I'm right. That act actually clearly sealed the Dalits getting ownership, because it's clearly said the cultivators, cultivator caste. So that actually is excluded. So I think that question left open in many ways. But I think even then, I think his main problem, he believed even economically one can still acquire by effort and thing, but the social is the main contention in this. If you think, I think that over determines the other two domain, I would say. Yeah, I think I answered. Thank you. Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Yeah.
Thank you, Kalai. I think with that, we'll bring the session to a close. Thank you so much, Kalai, for taking the time out and coming back to us. And it's always great to learn from you. And of course, this is very special because it is Ambedkar Jayanti today, and the 132nd birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. I guess in follow-up sessions, one thing, given that we kind of emphasize more on the economic reading of Annihilation of Caste, perhaps we should also plan to discuss Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's dissertation thesis, which is turning 100 years this year, on the problem of the Indian rupee, and also just to, of course, talk about various facets of Dr. Ambedkar's contributions. So that we'll keep for another time. hopefully this year. And but thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming and staying till the end. And yeah.
Thank you, Aarushi. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Really, really good. Thank you again. Yeah, see you soon. Yeah, thank you.